Welcome back to the Oklahoma Sooners podcast. Eric Bailey alongside Eli Lederman as we get ready for week 5 of Oklahoma's football season, coming off a loss for the first time in the Brent Venables era. It's been just a strange week, and it's really been interesting the week. We've learned a lot this week, Eli, about how they're going to handle losses.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think I wrote it in my story yesterday. This might be the most significant setback for the Sooners since Lincoln Riley bolted, I think. I mean, that speaks really to how well the last 8-9 months have gone, but also to just, I think, how stunning this loss was. I mean, the high that this program, this team came off of after Nebraska and all the national attention they got. And then you open Big 12 play with a team that's been a consistent thorn in their side. And Kansas State comes in and does Kansas State things with Adrian Martinez of all people. And here we are now in a week that I think just about everybody in Norman, down to the coaching staff and players, were a bit stunned. And now they're, as we talked about off camera, stripping down the studs like Brent Venables likes to talk about and trying to pull it back together for TCU.
How'd you like to be a Nebraska fan, man? A week after seeing OU come into your house and kind of dominate you, to see Adrian Martinez, the former quarterback, come and do what they did to Oklahoma. Nebraska fans, I mean, they were off last week. They probably felt just as miserable. Adrian Martinez looked really good, and it really brought out a lot of things that Oklahoma is really going to fix defensively.
Yeah, it was maybe a missed opportunity. We should have polled those Nebraska fans when we were up in Lincoln on Adrian Martinez, because I'm certain the answers they would have had about him would not have reflected the quarterback that we then saw, because he did it all. I mean, he won that game. I think, we'll get to Dylan Gabriel versus Adrian Martinez or how things went on Saturday, but in a game where, it was there to be taken, one quarterback really went and grabbed that game, and it was Adrian Martinez with a performance that I think stunned us all.
It really surprised me just because of how well the defense has been playing all season. They hadn't allowed more than 14 points in a game, albeit the competition wasn't quite the caliber of Big 12 competition. They really looked good in those first 3 weeks. I think that's what surprised me the most. And the lack of tackles for loss. Oklahoma only had 4 tackles for loss. Didn't record a turnover, which is something that they really need to probably get a little bit more in their favor. It's something they need to work on. It just everything across the board caught me off guard. The penalties, the face mask penalty on Billy Bowman late in the game. I know one play doesn't lose a football game for you, but that didn't help because they were really trying to fight their way back. And then, of course, the 55-yard run by Adrian Martinez on third and 16.
Yeah.
He ran for 55, and Ted Roof after the game said that there was an issue with a spy. They were supposed to have a spy on him, and the spy, I guess, just didn't make the play. So I think when you bring all that up, you just really think of all the issues that are going on with that Oklahoma defense, and it's been a topic of conversation this week as they prepare for TCU.
Yeah, I guess the way you would probably describe the whole performance and just about everything you laid out was uncharacteristic. Those first few weeks, we saw that. I think it really started up front, and Ted Roof sort of said the same. They lost the physical battle, and that was a front seven that the first few weeks had just lived in opposing backfields. They were getting sacks, getting tackles for loss, and none of that was there. And it seemed like without that, everything else kind of slid with it. And the penalties were not really, what they'd been about the first few weeks. The lack of tackling and execution felt like the opposite of what they had been, and it all kind of showed and showed in the big moments. I mean, that Adrian Martinez play, it seemed like it came down to that spot, that one error. But man, I mean, that if that wasn't indicative of the performance, I don't know what was. And now I think this week is really a defining week for the defense, because either they're going to revert back to some form of what we saw in those first few weeks, or we're going to see that, maybe that was early promise, but now that they're going up against these more talented, more experienced, maybe more complex offenses, that success isn't going to be there. So I think this is a really big, important week for the defense as they kind of get back on track, or attempt to at least.
When we look at the defense too, I know there's a lot of Oklahoma fans that saw this touchdown, saw the yards allowed, saw the big plays on third downs allowed, third down conversions. They think, oh, here we go again. New coach, new system, same result. And I know that happens. But, this is something that we knew that this wasn't going to be a seamless transition. There were going to be some growing pains. And I think we really, really saw the growing pains out there. And for Oklahoma's players, it's one of those things where, they talk about being bought into this system. Well, what happens when adversity strikes? It's one thing to have adversity and giving up an early touchdown, but it's another to have a loss. So how do they react to this? I think that's the big thing. And you're right, TCU's offense is amazing. They got one of the best offenses in the country, score a lot of points, put a lot of yards on the board. Max Dugan's really playing really well this week. So it's going to be one of those things where there's not that much time to really lick your wounds because you have another battle on Saturday.
Yeah, watching kind of what I have of TCU, they seem to have a lot of those dynamic playmakers. They have a quarterback who's doing it right now. So not going to be a lot of time to, pick the pieces up. I will say it's interesting. You talk about responding to adversity. And I think especially on the defensive end, hearing what we've heard this week from Reggie Grimes and Deshaun White and Ethan Downs, but how this year's a little bit different. New coaching staff and the way they handle a loss. I think, this is, I'm not quoting him word for word, but Reggie Grimes was talking about how in the past it would have been a real focus on what went wrong. And you guys did the X wrong. And I mean, he used the words derogatory and demeaning. I don't think he meant it that charged, but that was how he said it was in the past. And now it's, according to him, been more about, taking the good from the bad, identifying the issues and building from there. And Deshaun White mentioned, and I found this maybe most interesting, was him saying that, this year, rather than position group only film study, they're doing it as a defense together. And that after a loss, getting to watch, I'm sure I would love to sit in on one of those sessions after a loss like this, that them being together in that room, defensive line, linebackers into the secondary all together. He seemed to think that was a positive in terms of how to build from this. So they're certainly going back to the drawing board this week, and we're going to see just what they can come up with when we're in Fort Worth.
Oklahoma is 10-1 since TCU joined the Big 12 in 2012. The only loss was in 2014, 37-33. Eli, it was the famous Katy Perry game. I don't know if you're familiar with the story.
Enlighten me. Me. Come on.
Katy Perry was the ESPN's guest picker at Ole Miss. She picked OU to beat TCU that day. She had a cutout picture of Trevor Knight, said, "Trevor Knight, call me." She was flirting with Trevor Knight. Trevor Knight didn't call her, of course, and then OU loses. And OU would I think they would finish 8-4 that season. So in the regular season, they win one, lose one, win one, lose one. They started 4-0, nationally ranked, and the Katy Perry game sent them spiraling to the end of the 2014 season. Really, it's what brought Lincoln Riley to campus, because they let offensive coordinators Jay Norvell and Josh Heupel go after that season. So TCU, that's a little bit of the history lesson, the TCU OU series. Only one win over the Sooners in Big 12 play. That was in 14. Offensively, Dillon Gabriel, you look at his numbers, what he was able to do. I know he missed some passes. He missed some passes at key times, but still, like Brent Venables said, I don't think OU's in this game if not for Dillon Gabriel, and I don't think they have a chance to win. How do you build off that?
Yeah, I mean, talked to him last night. And it kind of matched his tone post game, where he took that as hard as anybody, and still is, and was pretty hard on himself. But you look at the stat line. If I told you pregame that he'd thrown for 330 yards, 4 touchdowns, and the offense put up 550 yards, I think most everybody in that stadium would have taken that and thought you had a Sooners win. And he was good. And I think he actually, the stats only reflect it so much with 61 rushing yards. I think he was really effective with his feet, and maybe some of the best movement for that offense outside of the big plays got made when Dillon Gabriel was running and when he was a running threat. So it was he's been so steady for them so far. I mean, something like 11 touchdowns, no interceptions. He's moving this offense. It still feels like they've got a bit of that parking brake on, but I don't know if that's a Dillon Gabriel issue. But then you look at the fact you see 4 touchdowns and you wonder if he could have had 5, 6, 7 with just a little more precision, a little bit better execution. And so I think Brent Venables is right, though, when he says they wouldn't have been in this game without him. But now the question is, Eric, where do they go from here? Where does he improve from here? How does this offense, which has, again, they put up the points here, but I think you could look at that performance, whether it was the pre-snap penalties, the third down struggles, the slow starts, and say they're still not there yet. What do they need to do to get to that next level?
You mentioned the pre-snap penalties. It's really shooting themselves in the foot. And we were in the press box Saturday night, and we kept mentioning that they just can't get out of their own way. The pre-snap penalties were huge. The holding call There was a holding call on Chris Murray that was huge. Even on fourth down, when you're going for it and you get a 5-yard penalty, it takes you out of rhythm totally. But I really think for Oklahoma, what they need to do is find a way to come out of the locker room strong. They've trailed in 3 of the first 4 games this season. The only game they didn't trail in was the UTEP game. Since then, they lost, down 3-0 to Kent State, 7-0 to Nebraska, and 14-0 to Kansas State. And that's something that we talk to the coaches about and talk to the players about. They need to find a way offensively to come out of the locker room and put points on the board, put pressure on the opponent. Kansas State, once they got that 14-0 lead, it really dictated what Jeff Lebby could really call and feel comfortable calling as an offensive coordinator. And I think that was huge. And Lebby's even mentioned that. Lebby, after game 1, you could tell Lebby didn't even like punting the football, let alone going scoreless in the first quarter to start games. So I think it's something that's really going to be a point of emphasis, not only this week, but moving forward. So I think that's the big key. Just find a way to get points on the board early, put pressure on the opponent. And, and going back to Dillon Gabriel, you look at I wrote this too. If you're a quarterback, you get too much credit when things are going good. You get too much criticism when things are going bad. There's no middle ground.
Yep.
And he is his toughest self-critic. He criticizes himself. He wants to be perfect, and no one's perfect, but he did put the team in position to win. If you're an Oklahoma fan, you'd love to have some of those throws back, and he would want some of those throws back. He even mentioned it too. Jeff Lebby said he wanted some plays back. He'd love some calls back. So I think this was a big a big test. It's going to be a big challenge. We'll see how they react. I'm really curious how they react. Dillon Gabriel's only lost back-to-back games once in his college career, so we'll see what happens this week. We look for more bright spots on that offense, and it seems like every week, Eli, we're talking about the same player. Eric Gray has really playing well. He's really playing like a captain. He's playing almost like, you hate to really put this on him early, but maybe an all Big 12 candidate at running back just with his consistency with what he's been able to do.
Yeah, he's running like the running back everyone projected him to be this year. I mean, he's been over 100 yards in 3 of the 4 games, and his probably 2 best rushing outings the last 2 weeks have coincided with this rushing attack kind of getting off the ground. I mean, 2 straight weeks of 200 plus yards. It's kind of what we expected with the Jeff Lebby offense, was that they would run the ball well, and it's all been him. I mean, he's been really impressive, and he, again, coming out of halftime last week, they were still slow, but the success they had was when they gave the ball to Eric Gray, and he's giving them that dimension. I think the passing game, we know they're going to be able to make big plays. I think they could probably get more consistent there. But I think that second dimension of the offense with Eric Gray and what he can produce and has produced has to be from a tough night, a night a lot of Sooner fans would probably say they'd like to forget. He was another bright spot for another week. And with Jeff Lebby and talking about the slow starts again, talked about it for 4 weeks now, and they keep saying, well, this week we're gonna really lock in and focus on that. And it hasn't quite happened. But Jeff Lebby this week talked about putting in some more quote unquote layup plays. See what he means by that. I would say, as much as we've been focused on it each week, because each week they have started slow, keep an eye on how they open this week and what they do. What are some of those layup plays? Do they maybe dig into, I don't know if you'll see Braden Willis throwing any passes, but if they just get creative or find some plays to get their playmakers involved, because they really haven't early on, and it's biting them. Especially for a team that I think now ranks 130th out of 131 teams in time of possession. So when they're not moving, they're really not moving. They're running 3 plays and getting off the field, and that certainly burned them with Kansas State. But Eric, I think this past weekend was maybe an introduction into the Big 12 as we know it, at least in 2022. It's such a top to bottom league. It's a league where I think you're going to see, would it stun you, for example, to see K-State go wherever they're going this week and revert to the team that lost to Tulane and OU to go to TCU? And I just think that's the conference we're going to see this year is 1 week to the next, just everything changing.
It's funny. We were in the press box before the game. This was, of course, before OU K-State, and we asked, who's the number 10 team in the Big 12? Who's the last place team? I don't know if you can pick the last place team. We went with West Virginia, but they just beat Virginia Tech too. Played Pittsburgh strong. I mean, West Virginia is not a bad team. You can't go Kansas. What about the Jayhawks? 4-0.
Man,
I'm just hoping they win 2 more and go to a bowl game. It's been forever since they've been to a bowl game. You got to be happy for those Jayhawk fans that have lived in misery for years for what they're doing. Sellout stadium. But then you look at across the board, some teams that you think were struggling. Iowa State lost to Baylor, but Iowa State beat Iowa. Iowa, that was a big win for the
Yeah.
Cyclones. I mean, there's no layups. We talk layups. We're talking about with Jeff Levy. There's no layups in this league. There's no team that goes in there and you say, oh, you can get a win there, because I just don't think Oklahoma. It's not like years past. You're not head and shoulders above the competition. Texas Tech beating Texas. How about that one too? I mean, OU and there's a chance OU in Texas, when that game comes around, the records. I mean, you hate to say 500 teams, but you never know what's going to happen. So no, but this Big 12, it's going to be fun to cover. You just have no clue who's going to play in that championship game. And I know we're still in week 1, things are going to sell itself out, but it's really interesting to see the parity of the league.
Yeah, I think you would have looked, at least in the last few years, at some gimmies, quote unquote, on the schedule. Kansas would have been one of them. I think a trip to Lubbock is no longer as cushy looking as it might have in years past. West Virginia, I after week 1, I think we all looked at Neil Brown as maybe the next coach out of the conference, and now they look, at the very least, competent and sturdy. And so you run it down, and there's not that gimme week on the schedule, and that's the case for every Big 12 team. And so I think if you look at the conference contenders, and shoot, that list might be 6 or 17 teams long, but even the preseason contenders, OSU, Baylor, OU, K-State is a dark horse. They're not going to have a nice soft run at any point. And we're going to see, I think, some of those teams get handed losses you wouldn't have expected preseason. To your point, it's going to make for some really fun football, but probably some frustrating football for some of these fan bases as well. When a Kansas team doesn't look like what Kansas is supposed to look like.
As we prepare for an 11 o'clock kickoff, Eli, I don't know what we did, but another 11 o'clock game, I'll take it. 11 o'clock the week after, too. OU Texas, it was announced at 11 o'clock, so a lot of morning kickoffs. But let's think about, just kind of predict what's going to happen. I think I'll go first. I think Oklahoma will win. I think it'll be a close game. I think it'll be 35-31. I think Oklahoma finds a way to win this game. But nothing's going to come easy, and I'll be saying that all year. Nothing's going to come easy. I mean, if you're Brent Venables, you're happy with a 1-point win. I think the point spread last I saw was 4.5 for Oklahoma. So Vegas thinks it's going to be close. Your thoughts? What's this game going to turn out like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I don't think this is the week that we see them just totally bounce back and it's 41-0. The defense, shows out again. I think it's going to be tight. I think this past week we saw a 1-score game that OU came out on the wrong side of. I would back them to maybe play a close game and take it this time. I'm really, really curious about the defense. I just think for all that we saw those first 3 weeks, it got so quickly exposed in their first kind of shot against what proved to be a real serious offense. So big week for them, but I don't think they're going to come out and hold TCU to 10 points. But this TCU defense has, at least last week with SMU, they proved themselves to be a bit vulnerable. I think this could be the week for Dylan Gabriel, Jeff Levy, and this offense to really break out. And they certainly could use it. And that would, to me, be the difference maker for them.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to talking to you next week. We'll be seeing what happened at TCU and looking forward to Texas. It's hard to believe Texas week is almost here, but you can't overlook TCU first. So thanks everyone for thanks everyone for appreciate it. Yeah, go ahead.
I gotta look, we're on to football, and I'm really not past the Trevor Knight thing, like how he never called Katy Perry. I haven't gotten past that. If I've seen distractions, it's because of that. But it is crucial to point out tomorrow, some of us will be in front of Porter Moser, getting our first look at least in the fall of OU men's basketball. And it's kind of hard to believe we're talking about Texas week coming fast. Basketball season is upon us as well. So we will get, I think people are most excited to hear from some of the new faces. There's a lot of them, Joe Bamisile and Grant Sherfield among them, the new backcourt, but we'll get our first look at OU men's basketball tomorrow. Had to get that in there before we jumped off.
I'm glad you did. I was going to skim over that, and I want to see if Porter Moser has he shaved. Is he?
That's the big. I mean, Eric, do you want to make a bet? Do you want to make what kind of bet can we make if he shaved or not?
I think he's shaved. I think it's basketball season, time to get to work. His days of, but I tell you, I'd love if he kept the beard. I mean, I'd vote for him to keep the beard. So I think we got a shaved Porter Moser. I mean, it's been pretty glorious though. It's been just seeing Porter be Porter. Porter's turning into an Oklahoman, that's for sure. So
and it's certainly a big year too for him. I mean, it's kind of I think based on the way he came in, kind of tail end of a COVID season and all that, it's felt like a lot longer. But this is year 2, and it's a big one for them, I think. And shoot, we're talking about how competitive the Big 12 is in football. We know what it'll be like in basketball. But I think with the guys they have, this is a year to at least aspire to make that first NCAA tournament under him, and we'll see how they get started.
Perfect. All right. Well, Eli, thanks again for bringing up basketball, and thanks to everyone out there for listening to our podcast. Of course, you can read all our content at TulsaWorld.com, podcast, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your platform, whatever platform you use, to get your podcast. And we'll talk to you next week. We'll talk OU Texas football next week.